In progress.
We don't want Terrence to have to repeat himself again. What he was just saying is that he's got notes for C and D, not for E. Welcome everybody to what was going to be the final in the series here. If we decide to do one more than this because we want to get to C in or to E in Terrence's notes, something that we might decide later. But for right now, we are kind of treating this like the grand finale for the first half. Welcome you guys. I'm going to run downstairs. I've got a couple of things to put in order. I'll be listening through headphones and also joining via my phone as I wash dishes and do some basic housewife chores. I kind of expect, I kind of want to listen to Terrence's notes for sections C and D a little bit more like I'm listening to a podcast or something. But before we get into the tarrying, the totality and infinity section of this, I just wanted to check in with Cesar and William. Will, is there anything that either of you guys want to say for the good of the order, or yeah, how goes your infinition? It's always a sketchy thing to call on someone whose camera's off. You actually don't know if they're there. But Cesar, you said you kind of you've been recovering from COVID. That's where you're coming from.
Yeah, but maybe a bigger thing is that just been really focused on trying to get some work stuff that's been needing to be done for a while. And because of that, a lot of my mental computer energy has been put towards work. And then at the end of the day, I don't want to put the mental work energy towards a book like Totality and Infinity. So I haven't kept up for the last uh, several sections, and I'll be able to like kind of pick at it as we get closer back to um, revamping back in the winter time. So for the time being, I'm just kind of gonna be open to hearing whatever ideas are presented today, but I don't really have like a basis for um being able to yeah, develop anything in depth because I haven't read the stuff. So that's kind of just where I'm at.
Cool. Um, and I guess Will's probably not able to pop in right now. Also, Christopher, I don't know if he said he wasn't going to be able to make it to this final one, or maybe he'll actually still pop in at some point. But for now, I think it's great to just like move forward. I'll just say I haven't thought about totality and infinity very much at all, except to think about the critiques of Levi Brule and of participation as a Eurocentric, chauvinistic sort of approach. So I actually went and I read Bruno Latour's We Have Never Been Modern, which I think is really a fantastic critique of Levi Brule, and of course, and by implication, the whole structure of Levinas's approach to thinking about what it is to be human. Um, I'm not saying that I think that is a nail in the coffin for a Levinasian approach, and in a sort of sense, I don't think it's really damning for him in any sort of definitive way, but there is stuff that needs to be thought about, and I look forward to doing a sociology versus anthropology versus critical theory short course maybe next year on the kind of, I want to talk about different people's critiques of the distinction between sociology and anthropology, but I also want to, still give guys like Levi Brule their due. And I think the only kind of teaser I want to say in that direction for now, Bourdieu and Latour are both good for thinking that critique of anthropology. But specifically, Bourdieu, he's going to point out that the thing that scholars are all missing is that they have scholae, and that they're forgetting about their role in the reproduction of a class society, and they impose or superimpose their intellectualist conceptual models into the informants and agents in the social field that they are analyzing, and so, like, the intellectual imposes or projects like their own working model of like how things work, right, onto people. And so, like, for Lacan, that would be, here you have a theorist saying, oh yeah, it's like the OJA is working in this person, but it's like you're trying to explain the practical behavior of a person who doesn't necessarily approach the world this way. And now the question is that idea or concept really operative in this person, or are you kind of projecting it there? Well, when it comes to anthropology, there's obviously a lot of stuff like that Bourdieu's going to help us think about. And actually, I brought up Baudrillard's name there because there's also something I have to do with Baudrillard when it comes to all of these specific questions. But the last thing I want to say about Latour is, like, if we have never been modern, then there's a real case to be made that participation in the way that Levinas is thinking about it is something. It's almost like there's different kinds of participation, perhaps. There's different degrees of participation. Maybe this kind of separation and interiority that he's thinking of is a specific kind of human experience that is not something that most people have ever accessed, and maybe that most people will never access. Maybe it's not even something that most people should access. So this is where Illich would come in and say, you're talking about bookishness, Levinas. You're talking about bookishness and assuming that that's the real human. And what about it? What about humans who don't feel the need to do that? Are you saying they're not human? And that would be then for us like a critique of all of these things we say about functional illiteracy and structural stultification at Theory Underground. Would free human beings necessarily be able to interpret things from so many different perspectives? Or is that a specific kind of desire on the part of a certain kind of subject who's responding to a specific kind of calling, and just because we lack the ability to pursue that calling, we then critique all of humanity on the basis of, well, we're all not doing this thing. Well, maybe everyone else doesn't want to do that thing. Traditionally, pastors, they do a thing. Professors, they do a thing. Not everybody wants to do what pastors and professors do. So could it be similar? Underground theorists are saying, oh, look at us. We don't get to do these things. But then in reality, most people are like, yeah, no, but we wouldn't want to do those things. We want to go hiking. We want to go gardening. We want to play soccer. We have no interest in your books, Dave. So that's like this whole critique on Levinas. It's a critique on me. It's a critique on, by implication, many of us here. Maybe it is damning. Maybe it's not. But these are the questions that come up thanks to Bourdieu, Latour, and Illich just here in the last year. And so Levinas on participation, it's very crucial for thinking about what it is to be human, but then also turning back and going, is our idea of human just bookish? All right. So that's pretty much what I had. And now I'm going to just listen to what you guys got, starting with Terrence and your notes.
Yes, okay, but first on Bruno Latour, that book is We Have Never Been Modern is for me a transitional book, and the book a few years later is sort of a synthesis, an inquiry into modes of existence. For me, I keep thinking of that when I read Levinas, because one of the concepts he's got that underlines that book, although he only sort of sketches it out in a couple of places, is the difference between being as such or being as the same and being as other, which he hints is somehow more fundamental. So what I take from We Have Never Been Modern is the participation has never gone away. That we've still got it, and in an inquiry into modes of existence, he distinguishes 15 modes of existence, and participation, or what I'm calling with you participation, and with Levinas, is one of the modes, which he calls metamorphosis. And secondly,
No way. That's
yes.
amazing.
And secondly, I forget what I was going to say. Secondly, well, he does have a religious mode of existence, which is based on speech, which he tries to distinguish from the metamorphic or participatory mode of existence. But the whole 15 are what we need to describe modern Western people. And I find that Levinas, while making a sort of hierarchy between participation and the elemental and transcendence, he's a bit schizophrenic. He really likes the elemental, which I take to be on the side of participation, and he gives really rich descriptions. And then whenever he can take a swipe at the pagan gods and say they're faceless, they're the bad infinite, and so on, he will do that. And I always feel uncomfortable with this idea of it's sort of a historical teleology. There were the pagan gods, that was participation, it was rich, but it was also violent and sacrificial. And when you're more evolved, you get to the transcendent other and the Torah,
100%.
maybe the Judeo-Christian synthesis, if he's willing to allow that, because many people say that the hyphen between Judeo and Christian is a lie; they're incommensurable. So anyhow, I think that's a bias in Levinas, and we don't need to share it or in exactly the same way. And Latour does include both of these modes of being or modes of existence, the metamorphic or pagan, which is in technology, is in going to the cinema, is on the internet, and so on now. They're where the metamorphic forces that don't sort of respect our identity but traverse it to be found. And the religious mode of existence, which is based on speech and books, hermeneutic practice of reading and rereading. So I think there is place for a good bridge between the two, and that if you give credence to Latour, he indirectly confirms or validates Levinas. So you have to read an inquiry into modes of existence.
I'll probably get into that today. Thank you. Like I'm on this kick, and the fact is
Yes.
I did We Have Never Been Modern in a day, right?
Yes,
And
it's
it's
short and
I've
quick.
spent the last 7 years wanting to read it, and then I was finally like, I have to read it now because of how much this participation angle is essential in Levinas. And I don't think it would not have been so clear had it not been for you really pointing it out. Like it's once you pointed it out, like it really unlocks so much of what is going on, especially in section 2, in establishing like all of this. Like I used to think when I read section 2 that was like I missed the sentences that are right there on the page saying that this is all to get at those relations that are analogous to infinity. His point, though, is that yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that feels exterior to us, but it's not this kind of absolute exteriority that he wants to get at with the other. There's all kinds of things that feel transcendent, like in the elemental, but they're not transcendental in the way that the other is. And it's just like,
Wait
to
a
me, it was like,
second. You did a dangerous slip that I want to comment on. You said transcendent and then you said transcendental. And there's a problem
yeah,
in the translation at a point where Lingus mistranslates and slips from one to the other.
okay.
So let's be wary of the slip.
And is it that the transcendental has to do with actual structures of, whereas the transcendence just anything outside, or what?
Yes. Wait a second. Let's get concrete. Page 148.
Okay.
There's a mistranslation.
Okay, wonderful.
148.
Well, actually, I'll just give you the floor here and get after cleaning up this kitchen while I listen to you. All right.
Good. That's a Jordan Peterson move. To get your ideas clear, you clean up your room or your kitchen. So, okay, on page 148, we have a couple of lines, then the first paragraph, then the second paragraph, and which begins with egoism, enjoyment, sensibility, and the whole dimension of interiority. And towards the end of this second paragraph, it says, just as the infinite does not raise up the finite by opposition, just as the interiority of enjoyment is not deducible from the transcendental relation is not deducible from the separated being as a dialectical antithesis, forming a counterpart. Okay. I read that. I thought, that's funny. He's talking about transcendence, not, or the infinite that does not raise up the finite by opposition. And suddenly he's talking about the transcendental relation, which logically is the finite in relation to the infinite. And so it's the transcendent relation. In the French, it's transcendent. So I think Levinas is very careful. Sometimes we use the two terms interchangeably, but Levinas is very careful in distinguishing the two. And Lingus is very careful in his translation. But in that case, the transcendental relation is the transcendent relation. And that caused me to question what is the status of the transcendental in Levinas. And I think it's a little ambiguous or ambivalent. As Dave just said, the transcendental concerns structures that are the conditions of experience or horizons of experience. And Levinas, at the beginning in the preface, he makes a distinction between the transcendental doctrine, transcendental idealism, and the transcendental method. And in the rest of the book, he sometimes uses the word or the concept of transcendental method positively as what he's doing. He's finding these horizons, these structures, these non-empirical conditions of experience. And sometimes he uses the transcendental method. So we have a distinction between the transcendental doctrine of idealism, transcendental idealism, and the transcendental method. And he seems to be saying that you can keep the transcendental method, and it's good, and drop the transcendental idealism of the German idealists, and by extension, Husserl, for example. And then he sort of oscillates on the value of the transcendental method. Sometimes it's negative, and he considers that it's limited to representation, and sometimes his usage of the term or the concept transcendental method is positive, and he considers that that's the sort of thing he's doing, even if he goes beyond it when he talks about the idea of the infinite. So when he's restricting himself to the realm of the elemental, and then enjoyment, and then dwelling and possession and labor, and even the feminine, he seems to be considering that they're not empirical concepts and structures that he's putting forth, but transcendental ones. So that was just something that came up. From the beginning, say that Cesar, is it Cesar or Cesar? The S is a S or a Z in the middle of your name.
It depends on who you're asking. If you're asking the Spanish speakers that talk to me, it's a more of a S sound.
More of an S sound.
Yeah, with the little trill of the R at the end, Cesar.
Yes. Yeah.
With
But
Americans,
how do you?
it could be all over the place. But basically most people just call me Cesar. So
Cesar.
kind of a
Okay.
softer S,
Softer.
but the Z is fine because I mean Caesar is much more of a common name than Cesar. So
Yes, maybe too common. Maybe he's the empirical Cesar and you're the transcendental Cesar.
well, how would you say it in French? Because I know that there's the film
César.
awards that are named after it.
César.
César. Okay.
Okay, so now I've cleared that up to more or less great extent. My observation is he's always sort of distinguishing himself, whether he mentions them or not, distinguishing his ideas in contrast with Husserl or Heidegger. I think he's incorporating Bergson without acknowledging Bergson. And there's a brilliant thing at the beginning, I think, of section C, where he talks about labor and talks about the proletarian condition of accursed labor. So he seems to be going with Marx. And then he talks about how his analysis of the enjoyment is different from the absurd world of Geworfenheit, which is the fallenness of Heidegger. So he's seeming to say that Heidegger only gets as far as estranged labor. That all being in time is, when you look at it through the spectacles of the separation as the positive work of enjoyment, and Heidegger doesn't get to enjoyment, that he's describing the dehumanized world of estranged labor with his notion of fallenness. So it comes up in a couple of other places, but I thought that was really interesting as a one-upping of Heidegger.
Could you say that one more time? What Heidegger is, or what is the Marx term? What is the Heidegger term, and then what is Levinas saying about these things?
Okay, I'll try and find the exact quote, because sometimes I wrote down pages. That was just a general remark, so I didn't write down the page number. It's,
Yeah. because this is, yeah, so he brings up the
Gewolf.
proletarian condition, and then he quotes the end of that section with saying that's the absurd world of Geworfenheit. And he's saying that
Yes.
that's where labor only becomes exploitation in that sort of setting. And that ties in with elsewhere when he said that like food becomes an implement in this kind of situation. He says food only becomes an implement like in this world of exploitation. And well, that's another, so that he's kind of saying that both Marx and Heidegger are looking at the situation they're in and they're describing it. And he's saying what he's focusing on is like this level that would be true outside of capitalism. What they're focusing on is what's going on in capitalism. Marx is going to talk about how it's exploitative, and Heidegger kind of naturalizes it. I think Levinas is
Yes,
thinking
that's
that.
it. So page 146. But labor itself, by virtue of which I live freely, insuring myself against life's uncertainty, does not bring life its final signification. It also becomes that from which I live. So we live from the elements, we live from the food, but we also live from labor. I live from the whole content of life, even from the labor, which ensures the future. So I live from is the category of enjoyment. The limit case in which need prevails over enjoyment, the proletarian condition condemning to accursed labor, in which the indigence of corporeal existence finds neither refuge nor leisure at home with itself, is the absurd world of Geworfenheit. Geworfenheit. So it seems to be saying that Heidegger gave a good description of the proletarian world without realizing that he was describing that there was a political dimension to his descriptions in Being and Time, and that the world he describes as the world of thrownness is the proletarian world. And all his stuff about what he says, Dasein is never hungry, or Dasein never eats, or that's a stratum of the phenomenological or transcendental description of human existence that Heidegger didn't get to or neglected. So it is a book of ruptures. I mean, he's talking about the rupture in the totality. So he's rupturing the totality of Heidegger's thought as well. So even if there are sort of cracks or not explosions.
And I just want to add, like, one of the big things going through Being in Time was, well, is this Heidegger just starting with what's closest to us, but then he's going to build out to something else? Like, a lot of people leave out the third mode of existence, which is the most important. They focus on the present in hand versus the ready to hand. But existence is the third mode, and that is Dasein itself. And so that's supposed to be separate because we're not just beings who are present in hand or ready to hand. But what it okay, so I think one approach would say that's like Heidegger would say human beings aren't tools and human beings aren't entities as objective things. They're the beings who can use and perceive things as such. So that sets us apart. But then there's like this interesting thing we were following out, which is like, well, yeah, but in 1933 and 1934, he's really like saying there's three kinds of people. There's the sort of the mind, the people who are the mind of the people, and then there are the people who are soldiers or workers, and that's like the three kinds of people in the German state. And he's saying that we have to free the only way to free yourself, the only way to be authentically free and not like this bourgeois individualistic freedom that is a lie. the only way to be really free, and this is in 1933-34, is to free yourself into being basically an extension of the German people of the Volk towards its war project. And so the only way he uses the word freedom throughout Being in Time is that you can free something into its assignment, free something into its engagement. So the tool is not freed until it's put into a relationship with the equipmental totality so that it can help build things. Well, if Heidegger's going to use that kind of freedom for the human being, you're freed to an assignment that serves the goals of the nation state. It does seem like, even though he wants to talk about existence as like this separate category, we're the beings who make things tools and can also perceive them as objects. Well, it seems like there's like this Weasley little thing going on where it's like, actually, though, people can be the tools, right? And so I think Heidegger wants to critique that tendency at the same time that he wants to give into it. That's kind of where we stand right now. There's probably a lot more ways to flesh that out. But for right now, I just wanted to say it's not just that food becomes an implement and Dasein is never hungry, but it's also like, no, at least for periods of Heidegger's thought, the human is only meaningfully human if it's an actual implement as well for the nation state. But that, I arguably he is critiquing that in the question concerning technology when he talks about how humans just become
Heidegger
human resources.
Evolves, and there is a point
right.
earlier on that we remarked that he was seemingly criticizing Heidegger's fourfold, but one wonders, was Heidegger influenced by Levinas's earlier arguments, or did he sort of follow a logical path similar to the logical path that Levinas went on? But Heidegger's self-criticism, at least in part, takes on the similar sorts of criticism to the ones that Levinas proposes. So when I said the Geworfenheit, Levinas says, oh, that's just proletarian labor, but you didn't notice that there was this political dimension to your description. That's just for Being in Time, and the ideas put forward by Heidegger around that time, and not definitively critiquing the whole of Heidegger's project at that point. After that, on page 147, 148, there's just a little thing. It seems like a little thing, but it raises an interesting point. I think it's towards the bottom of the page. He talks about a good time. I didn't write down the line number. It's the last line. This liberation flashes in the light of happiness in separation. So the liberation or the freedom that separation brings is, I'm going maybe to comment on that later, not to be in the assignment to the tasks of the state or whatever. It's the liberation corresponds to suspension. And I want to comment on that later, but he continues, its free flight and its grace are felt and are produced as the very ease of good time. So here, there are a couple of places in these two sections where he's playing either with etymology or, as in this case, with a play on words in French. So good time is heure bonne. Heure, which means hour or time, and bon, bonnne, which means good. So the adjective after the noun in French most of the time. And happiness is bonheur, bonheur, just one word, but it's like sort of abbreviated condensation of a good time becomes bon, becomes bonheur, which means happiness. So it's free flight and disgrace I felt that I produced as the very ease of good time, because with the elemental, even if there is this sort of abyss and bad infinite and uncertain future worry and so on, there are and the suffering, there are the always in principle these good moments, these good times, and there's always a moment of happiness. So he continues, it's free flight in this grace I felt that I produced as the very ease of good time. It is freedom referring to happiness, made of happiness, and consequently compatible with a being that is not causa sui, that is created. So he just juxtaposes good time and happiness. And then I think it's there that he goes on to talk about, on page 148, the use of seemingly negative words, such as separation and atheism, that are in fact undergirded by positive events. So once again, I didn't write down the line number. It's at the end. We have two lines at the top of page 148, then a first real paragraph, which is short. And towards the end of that, he says, separation and atheism, these negative notions are produced by positive events. To be I, positive, atheist, negative because it has the negative prefix, a, without God, at home with oneself, positive, separated, negative because you have the I think the SO is a cut, happy, created. These are synonyms. So he's got a constant polemic with the philosophies of existence that overemphasize the negative. And he say, yes, I'm going to be using negative notions in terms of the way the words are formed, but they're synonymous with these positive events that have more importance or primacy. So don't be fooled by this constant cropping up of negative words. We've seen over and over again that he thinks that life is affirmation, enjoyment is affirmation, and suicide is a ontological mistake, because life you can't condemn life because it's one part of life is condemning another part of life, and so you're affirming life. So there's a whole Nietzschean undercurrent, because Nietzsche says similar things, that you can't judge life because you're part of life, and it's one part of life judging and trying to lord it over another part of life. So the base current is positive, is affirmative, and that's something that he thinks that the philosophies of existence sort of didn't fully see or didn't stress enough, preferring to emphasize the negative concepts or the negative seeming concepts. Then just after, on page 148, is the note I had on the mistranslation where transcendental occurs twice, transcendental relation, when it should be just transcendent relation, just by the logic of the passage, and which says the infinite does not raise up the finite by opposition. The infinite is not in any dialectical relation with the finite, a transcendent relation, which cannot be deduced from any dialectical relations like antithesis and opposition. So just by the logic and by consulting the French, I verified that in the French it's transcendent relation.
This is on page 149.
This is on page 148 at the bottom, near the bottom of the second paragraph. The infinite does not raise up the finite by opposition, just as the interiority of enjoyment is not deducible from the transcendental relation. The transcendental relation is not deducible from the separated being as a dialectical antithesis. So there is a contrast, if you will, between the separated being and the other, but you can't deduce the transcendent other from the finite being, not even the separated being. So on the plane of existence and the plane of separation, there are dialectical oppositions, and that that's part of a totality or part of the same. And the relation with the other is of a different sort, and it's a transcendent relation. It's not so it's a mistake to say it's a transcendental relation. And that made me think that despite Levinas being ambivalent about the transcendental method, that he because sometimes he confines the transcendental method just to representation and he's against it, but at other times he seems to once or twice come out in favor of it, and at other times there are all these remarks where he says this is the condition of the empirical experience, but I'm not talking yet about the empirical experience. The important one that came up last week is when he says, I am not so foolish as to say there must empirically be a woman in the dwelling. It's the transcendental, well, he doesn't use the word, but it's the thought, it's the transcendental presence of the feminine that defines or exists with the dwelling, and that's the condition for the empirical presence of the woman or not, implying that there need not be a woman present. There may be something else that gives this feminine quality of welcome. Page 149. I don't know why I wrote it down. Agreeableness is the agréable. We even get a note. This is a tough word to translate, agrément. He does, Lingus puts a note there. And agrément is to welcome favorably, and to, or even up, it's more official than agreeable. It's almost to the point of endorsing. So if you have the agrément of a brand, it means you work with the name of the brand. If you make an official request, you say, please agréer, please welcome favorably my request. That's very polite official language when you're writing to an ambassador or to the dean of the university or something like that. That's so it's not just agreeable, which would make it a near synonym for enjoyment, the agreeableness, but it's sort of a further turn of the spiral. We have enjoyment and the favorable welcoming of what is enjoyed. So it's the more reflexive aspect or dimension of the enjoyment. And it goes on to become interiority. Yes?
That's really great. I ran up here just to double check a passage here that was, I think, back up what you're saying about the transcendental for Levinas. And so I'll just, yeah, while I'm up here really quick, I don't know if this is setting you back from where you were going, but just really quick.
No, this is good.
It's at the top of 25. But before I talk about the top of 25, this is in the preface. This is following out from a whole section where he was basically saying, yeah, eschatology would be great. Eschatology is good. Here's the reasons why eschatology is great and good, for arguing against this sort of like, oh, ethics is just based in war and actually morality is just, bullshit outside of politics. Then he goes, well, I'm not going to be doing eschatology. I'm going to be doing philosophy, right? And so that's what he says at the bottom of 24. So he's saying, as great as that would be, I'm not going to be doing eschatology. I'm going to be doing philosophy. And so he talks about, he says, without substituting eschatology for philosophy, without philosophically demonstrating eschatological truths, we can proceed from the experience of totality back to a situation where totality breaks up, a situation that conditions the totality itself. Such a situation is the gleam of exteriority or of transcendence in the face of the other. The rigorously developed concept of this transcendence is expressed by the term infinity. This revelation of infinity does not lead to the acceptance of any dogmatic content whose philosophical rationality cannot be argued for in the name of the transcendental truth of the idea of infinity. Now, this is where we tie it into the transcendental method, though. He says, for the way we are describing to work back and remain this side of objective certitude resembles what has come to be called the transcendental method, in which the technical procedures of transcendental idealism need not necessarily be comprised. And so he's saying he's going to more or less remain on this side of, he's saying he's going to work within the phenomenal, he's the phenomenological reduction. He's not going to be doing a lot of speculative metaphysics here. And so he wants to do, he says it resembles what's called the transcendental method, which is to say, he wants to get at the structures that condition this experience. And he just said it on the previous page, that is the gleam of exteriority or of transcendence in the face of the other. That prior sentence, that conditions the totality itself. So that is the condition. And so here he is directly saying, yes, it's going to resemble the transcendental method. But then he's also saying, but I'm also not necessarily going to use its technical procedures. So he wants to honor the spirit of the transcendental approach, while at the same time potentially going about it a different way. That's what I take this to be saying.
Yes, I agree. So it resembles the transcendental method because we have these conditions and horizons, but it doesn't have the crystallized out or dogmatic forms it's been liberated. The transcendental method has been liberated to become something else. There's something we're talking about agreeable ness. And that's on page 150. Towards he goes from agreeableness to gentleness, and at page 150 there's the about 12 lines, the end of a paragraph that began on page 149. Then there's the first full paragraph of 150, and towards the end of that he talks about gentleness, and he talks about a delightful lapse, in inverted commas, of the ontological order, which is the gentleness or the warmth of intimacy, which is not a subjective state of mind. It's not psychological, but an event in the ecumenia of being. And this struck me because a few pages later, he uses virtually the same expression of delightful lapse. And in French, it's an alliteration. It's défaillance délicieuse, and then délicieuse défaillance. So he seems to like his word skill there. And défaillance is not just a lapse. It's sort of a default in the machine, or a failure, or a defect, or a dysfunction. So a delightful lapse of the ontological order. I'm not sure why Lingus chose to translate it by lapse, which is a little weak to me, but a lapse can be a strong notion. Could be the idea, I think, is a contamination, but it could be the idea of the feminine as the lapse, the fall. So the feminine is, although for me, he's describing the feminine really positively. So I think association with Eve and the fall in the Garden of Eden, which is the elementals, maybe, is I think it's a wrong track to go on. But maybe that's why he's saying lapse. Of course, there's the pre-lapsarians, or we can be like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So there's this idea of lapse, maybe. Otherwise, it's this theological idea, but otherwise, a lapse is like a slip. A lapsus. So anyhow, he repeats it, and in that same paragraph, well, just next to it, he talks about ecumenia, and suddenly, in all this talk about dwelling, habitation, and interiority and intimacy, he starts talking about economy, and ecumenia is the just more etymological version of economy, and for most of what he says concerning economy, it's not economy in the modern financial sense. And the French really like this, probably Heidegger does as well. The Greek root of economy is oikos, O-I-K-O-S, usually it's transliterated, which means home. So he's following, it may not exactly be just free association, but he's using the logic of the language, an empirical set of words, to show that this empirical linguistic set of traces corresponds to the structures that he's or the horizons that he's setting up. So that goes for me to at least partially explain why he suddenly makes this transition from habitation, dwelling, interiority, economy, as if it was obvious. But for me, there's the etymological link that helps make the transition. I've almost done
There's something that backs up what you're
everything.
saying. There's something that backs up what you're saying. And I'll go ahead and try to find it while you keep going. But it's where he says economics, and then he says in the original sense of the term. And so,
Well, yes, good.
yeah.
I'll be happy to find that. After that, still on page 150, at the bottom of the page, he begins a new paragraph that he finishes on the next page. And the whole of this work, it begins the paragraph. The whole of this work aims to show a relation with the other, not only cutting across the logic of contradiction, where the other of A is the non-A, the negation of A, but also across dialectical logic. So I looked at this expression, cutting across. It seemed you sort of get what he means, but it doesn't seem to really say that. So in French, it's tranchant sur. So it can mean when you cut across a piece of meat with a knife, but that doesn't work because you've got the logical contradiction, you've got the dialectical plane, and you've got the oppositions, and the cut is the relation with the other is separate from, of a different order than this dialectical opposition. So it's not 100% correct in the dictionaries of translation, but a better translation would be breaking from the whole of this way to show a relation with the other. So the transcendent, infinite other, not only breaking with the logic of contradiction, but also with dialectical logic, where the same dialectically participates in and is reconciled with the other. So it's a different other. So it's a break from and not a traversing cut. It's a breaking cut. So after I go on to pay to the section D, page 152, just a little remark is he says the habitation, the home, can be seen as an implement or a tool because we can use it for our own interests or our own purposes, but that's an inadequate description. It's a dwelling, so we don't enjoy it as such, except when you've got a real estate point of view, when you buy a house and you enjoy the size of the rooms and the garden and the point of view, but dwelling is more than that. And I just wanted to point out that in English, we make that distinction quite regularly. We distinguish in the home, where the home there is basically the house, and at home. He's in the home. He could be there to remove the furniture. he's at home means he's there in the maybe functioning is the wrong word, but in the full-fledged notion of what a home is. Just as we say he's in the school, he's in the building. There may be no classes that day, or maybe an abandoned school, and he's at school is he's attending the lessons, or he's in the bank. Maybe it's a Sunday and he's broken in, and he's at the bank is for whatever bank transaction he wants to do. So it's a quite common distinction in English. For the dwelling, we have home and house. So the house will be the habitation as implement, and home would be the habitation as dwelling. In French, they've got maison. So you can say la maison est grande, the house is big. Il est à la maison, he's at home, but you would, so it's the same word. And if you want a word that is just reserved for being at home in the full-fledged dwelling sense, il est chez soi, he's at his understood home or place. So that's a distinction that is inscribed in the logic of our language quite easily. And on the same page, I wondered about recollection. So one of the things that stop me if anything I say is not clear or wrong, or I'm just going on too long. But recollection, I thought, at first I thought it meant the past, memory. But in fact, Levinas is constantly going back to the etymological roots and then sort of transforming them or twisting them slightly to fit in with the concepts he's developing. So recollection is in the sort of more religious sense of contemplation. Recollection in French is recueillement, and it's recollecting your thoughts and feelings into your inner home or inner castle. So it's not principally memory, it's withdrawal inside. Recueillement, recollection in that sense is withdrawal inside. So you see really clearly with memory, why are we going from inside intimacy to memory? I can see the memories inside in some way, but there's a little leap. But when you see that recollection primarily means this withdrawal inside oneself and withdrawal inside the home, it makes more sense. And I'm not sure. I'll mention it now. It happens on page 157, where he moves from recollection to welcome, which is the feminine, not function, the feminine dimension. And once again, if you follow the logic of the concepts, you can see that it's sort of, he's got a constellation of concepts that go around the same set of ideas. So habitation, dwelling, interiority, separation, recollection. all those go together. And if you look at the French roots, recollection we said is recueillement, RECUEILLEMENT, and welcome in French is accueil. César, do you know French a little or a lot?
I studied very basic stuff several years ago, but I could always
So,
use a brush up on just very particular things.
so accueil probably you've seen then, ACCUEIL. And if you break it down, you've got ac and cueil, CUEIL, and that's the basic root word for cueillir, pluck and gather. So gathering cherries. And recueillement has that same root of cueillir inside it. So that's why it's recollection. Lingus followed the etymology more than the actual meaning or the standard meaning in English, because there's collect inside. So he says on page 157, he moves from recollection or to welcoming, and part of the transition, aside from the concepts, is this resemblance between the words with the same etymological root. And here on page 153, we've got another of these things that says he's using a transcendental like method, because he makes a distinction between his concepts and the empirical. So where is it? The I exists recollected. It takes refuge empirically in the home. That should be easy to find. Not seeing it. I'm seeing some of it. We can.
What's the section that you're trying to find?
I've noted it down on page 153. I'm not sure if it's a direct quote. Because the I exists recollected, it takes refuge empirically in the home. If I didn't note down the line, that means that I considered it was easy to find. Oh no, it's at the top of page 154, sorry. It talks about recollection, the work of separation is concretized as existence in a dwelling economic existence. Okay, another reflection is when he talks about concretized, he talks about other similar things: accomplished, actualized, concretized. You think he's going to talk about empirical existence, but no, they're just these transcendental concepts when you take into account that they're not abstractions in the world of representation, but they're in the world as he's building up our understanding of it. And then he goes on, because the I exists recollected, it takes refuge empirically in the home. So this transcendental like structure, the I as recollected or as recollection, is how the I exists. One way this can manifest itself empirically is taking refuge in the home. But the concrete material home that we all know is just the empirical manifestation. So once again, it's like the disclaimer about woman. You could say, "Oh yeah, but I feel really uh, separated and happy and recollected in the desert. Even when I lose my tent, the wind blew my tent away, and I still felt recollected." That is not a refutation, because probably we wouldn't like to live 50 years in the desert without a tent or a covering. So the empirical manifestation of these structures is not what he's going for in the first place. He's going for transcendental-like structure that most often manifests itself in these empirical practices. So there are a couple of other places. I didn't write them all down, but for me, that's a similar argument.
No, Terrence, I think that's really helpful, and we need to. And I think it's especially a check on the way I was lecturing about it, where I think, and I guess I want to double check to understand, and I'm going to want to also look at the page. What's the page again?
This is on page 154, second line.
All right.
At the top.
So yeah, there's like this sort of logical progression from participation to interiorization, and that's the condition of possibility for being able to even have a totality ruptured by the idea of a perfect infinity. And the dwelling is playing this role. Your point is it doesn't have to be an empirical dwelling in the same way it doesn't have to be an empirical woman or feminine presence. So let's just but then it also, like, if you couldn't probably, be at home in the desert without shelter for 50 years, that also would then raise the question of, like, yeah, well, could it be similar with the home? You can't go for that long without some kind of gentle feminine welcome. Like, at some point you're going to need it. And maybe that'll be in your gay lover, or maybe that'll be in a dog. Could maybe even function as like that expectancy, that is that sort of loving sort of, perhaps, I don't know. But I just kind of want to say, like, there's going to have to be some kind of empirical confirmation of that transcendental structure.
Yes, but not necessarily the one we ordinarily think of.
Okay.
The structure has primacy, and the actualization is it's not random, because we wouldn't call these things dwellings if we just had a really hard skin and we lived in the desert. So there's a reason why we're calling these things by these names, the feminine in the house. That's the reason why we're calling it the feminine, because of the qualities of women and the assignment to the domestic role. But it's not a necessary connection.
Okay.
It's a very close connection, but it's not a necessary connection.
Right.
That's why it says empirically, I'm not arguing that there must, for logical reasons, I'm not deducing there must be a woman in that house over there because
Right.
it looks like a happy house. There could be, as you said, a Klingon gay lover.
Right. Okay, and so then at the top of 154, the line that you were going for, now that I've got it in front of me, what was the line?
Because,
Is it
line 2, because the I exists recollected, it takes refuge empirically in the home. So we don't first take refuge in the home and then recollect ourselves. It's because we are a recollecting sort of being that we will have a home and take refuge in it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's really good.
Um,
So then actually
not sure.
and just to connect that with what you're saying about the feminine not needing an empirical or counter empirical truth, yeah, that's at the bottom of 157, top of 158. So, which is just a few
Okay.
pages later.
And 157, because you mentioned that, it talks about sojourn, I think. Well, I've noted he talks about sojourn, conditions, empiricism. Is it on this page? This, okay, we have the end of a paragraph, then we have the first real full paragraph, and we talked about energy, which we already talked about last time. So energy is when he's thinking about labor, not just physical work, but as work within. The N is within or in, and the G is ergon, which is work. So he puts a hyphen in when he's really thinking of this I think he calls it a transcendental energy in relation to the habitation. So you can have this dwelling energy even when you have no more or virtually no more physical energy. You come back home and you have this energy of being with the family or whatever. And then it continues, this sojourn in a dwelling, in habitation, before imposing itself as an empirical fact, conditions every empiricism and the very structure of the fact imposed on contemplation. So it's the same as for the woman and for the home. The sojourn is that which conditions the empirical fact. It imposes itself as an empirical fact, but before that, it's there to condition the very structure of the fact imposed on contemplation. So that's a third case where he's saying the sojourn is a transcendental like concept. That's our term for it. It's not his term, but based on what he says in the preface.
So then you're saying sojourn and recollection, as well as dwelling, that these are all these are transcendental structures.
Yes.
Yeah.
But to be cautious, we call them transcendental like conditions. But that's what it is.
But then I want to get a sense here for this energy, the way that you're thinking about energy on this page. I'm not sure that I heard you right. So, for instance, you could be physically exhausted, but there's a kind of energy granted by this habitation. And
yes, it's
could we
the
say
energy
that
of
it's
interiority.
could we say it's the energy of renewal, or could it also be the energy of the special kind of energy that can come from getting your wits about you, having ease in a certain kind of space, and then with that sort of surplus, you're able to, as he says, he's talking about postponing enjoyment. Well, that means like you're also able to plan ahead, and that means there's another kind of energy that can come from being engaged in projects that span, days, weeks, months, years, that goes beyond immediate enjoyment. Could he be talking about that here as well? Because that's how I took that to be. What?
Maybe we're adding things that he doesn't put in, but that
Right.
we can sort of unfold. It's saying that there's the energy, the physical energy of the day. But imagine you go back to just a hotel room because your boss sent you to another city to make a deal. You go back to a hotel room, you can regenerate in a normal physical sense. You can close your eyes or watch TV or lie down or whatever. or just be alone with your thoughts. So maybe you can plan a little. But when you come home just as exhausted, there's the energy of being at ease with that dwelling, at ease with its receiving power. So I'm not sure if it has to be spelled out in projects and plans, but that's where freedom is. So freeing up your thoughts will be part of that. In fact, maybe it's not the same, but on the same page, I wrote something down where he talks about drawing the home that founds possession is not a possession in the same sense as the movable goods you can collect and keep. No, it must be a little higher than that. He talks about drawers, but I can't find it there. The second last paragraph begins, we shall describe in the pages that follow the relation that the home establishes with the world to be possessed, to be acquired. I skip a sentence. The labor that draws the things from the elements in which I am steeped discovers durable substances, but forthwith suspends the independence of their durable being by acquiring them as movable goods, transportable, put in reserve, deposited in the home. I don't know why he says the labor that draws. The word in French is arracher, which means to tear out. So we've got the elements, and you tear something out from that and make it a furnishing, or in fact, I would say furniture. It's not, because it's tables and chairs and stuff, and the word in French is most commonly used for furniture. So it's no longer just a sort of object in this elemental flux.
No, that's really
Yeah.
important.
Drawn it out. And I was thinking that maybe the thought and the energy that you have in the home is, in a similar sense, drawn out, ripped out, torn out of the normal physical flux. You've got some energy that is yours as somebody at home and at ease in the dwelling. You've freed up some energy in some way, which is implicit in the fact of being someone with a home and with the logical structure or the transcendental structure of a home. So it's a surplus. Maybe you could, we're introducing terms that he avoided, but it's a surplus energy in that sense. It's not the energy that you expend in work, physical work in the world. It's another energy that is tied to dwelling in the home and being at ease and being in relation with the feminine. So that's for the energy part. And then this paragraph that I read had lots of things. So there's draws from the point of view of French, should be rips, or you could say rests, W-R-E-S-T-S. It rests, it tears, it rips. It's a stronger notion and a more discontinuous notion than draws. I said that the movable goods could be considered to be furniture. There's an interplay of definitions in French. one definition is that there are buildings, they're immeuble, unmovable things, unmovable goods, because they can belong to someone. And then bien meuble or choses meubles are your goods that can be moved, unlike your building or the building that can't be moved. So they could be furnishings, but mostly it's furniture. And maybe objects to decorate can be considered to be movable goods. So they're no longer just things. They're
Right.
movable goods in the sense of furniture having a sense as existing in the home, in the dwelling.
I knew what he was getting at just in the context of the sentence or whatever, but I didn't like the word furnishing already because
Yes, I didn't like
the
it.
connotation in English is that it would just be some little extra thing that decorates, as opposed to like
Yes.
furniture. It's like, no, I genuinely love my couch. I genuinely love a good chair. And and that's not just a furnishing. It's like a lot more important to making it into a place, you know?
Yes. So unfortunately, Levinas is playing with the different expressions that have these words in it. So there was no one good translation, but I don't like furnishings and movable goods. It's like you've got boxes of frisbees and cherries or something. They're movable goods. It's a little too impersonal for me.
I started
Furniture,
thinking of
yes.
I with this particular term, um, the way I kind of thought of it in my mind for English was just something like modular furniture,
Ah,
Uh-huh.
something
yes.
where it's like it's almost IKEA type of furniture, right? Where it's like it's just a box, but it's a box where it's like it's multi-purpose. You could use it as this, or you could change it to a staircase if you wanted to. Uh, which I think maybe makes a little bit more sense in a little bit more of American sensibilities of home, but maybe didn't make sense to like an older generation where yeah, you buy a table and like that's the table. Like you're not
That's
gonna
my
move it
grandmother's
around.
table. I don't care whether it's too small or too big or it's got burn marks on it. I'm not going to get rid of that so easily. So yes, maybe that's another generation. But it is this idea of it's homey in some sense. Whether if IKEA is homey to you, then that's it. It's the empirical filling in of that conceptual box is not predetermined, but you're going to have some transcendental structure where some objects are just homish, speak of home to you.
They almost act as like heirlooms where you might even
Yes,
feel so proud of it that you would give it to a family member to pass it on. So in that sense, it has like a pricelessness to
Mm-hmm.
it as an object, even if you did buy it at just like a big box store. It could be your particular uh piece of furniture.
let's go even one step further because he hasn't got to the gift yet. But all these are conditions for being able to give. But he's building up towards that.
Yeah, though
157. Sorry.
though I just want to add that the difference between a commodity and the kind of gift that Marcel Mauss or Baudrillard is going to care about, that distinction is a distinction between a commodity as such and that meaningful object. And so he is kind of, it's important then, it's not just furnishings, but it includes the possibility of something being a meaningful gift, right? And I don't think that was something that I teased out or even was thinking too deeply about at the time. So that's a good point there.
So it's on this page at the bottom that there's a sentence about no positing of an empirical necessary presence of an empirical woman at the bottom of 157. Need one add that there is no question here of defying ridicule by maintaining the empirical truth or counter-truth that every home in fact presupposes a woman. So the feminine has been encountered in this analysis as one of the cardinal points of the horizon. He doesn't want to say transcendental there, but it's a cardinal point of the horizon in which the inner life takes place, and the empirical absence of the human being of feminine sex in a dwelling no ways affects the dimension. So we've got horizon, cardinal points, we've got dimension of femininity. So transcendental structure is one way of thinking about that. After that, I wanted to talk about, I think he goes on, he talks about suspension and postponement and suspending the uncertain future. So that's on page 157, I think he begins. And because it comes up in the next few pages, and he's used the word suspended before, I was thinking, is this deliberately or indirectly a play on the epoche, the suspension of the natural attitude in Husserl and in phenomenology? Is saying one of his things is bringing these abstract concepts down to earth. So he's saying, well, what would an epoche be in the world as I'm laying it out? And the epoche is postponing the uncertain future. And he says on this page 157 that labor suspends the same quote from the second last paragraph. The labor that draws things from the elements in which I am steeped discovers durable substances, but forthwith suspends the independence of their durable being by acquiring them as movable goods. So this is not the only place where he's talking about suspension, where we're taking something in the natural or the elemental world and we're suspending its independence, as later on he talks about on page 158, possession and labor. The first paragraph of possession and labor, the uncertain future of the element is suspended. So this may be me pushing things a little far, but he is resorting to, in a short space of time, this notion of suspension, and it's the same movement of taking something that, well, we talk with Husserl, the natural attitude, but here we're in the world, something in the natural world, and we're suspending its status as object in the natural world, and what goes with that. So one thing that goes with that is independence. So we're making it depend on us and our labor. That's why on page 157 he talks about suspending its independence. And another thing that goes with that, with the elemental, is the uncertain future, and we're suspending that by labor. So labor is the true epoche in the world. That was just something that I thought. I'm not particularly attached to that, but what goes with that? The uncertain future of the element is suspended. The element is fixed between four walls, so it's suspended in terms of connoting or implying an uncertain future. It's fixed between four walls. That's a sort of architectural suspension. It's calmed in possession. It appears there as a thing which can perhaps be defined by tranquility, as in a still life. So a still life is a sort of suspended moment in time, because it's inanimate objects in a painting or in a theatrical staging of a painting. This grasp on the elemental is labor. So just to bring to attention that labor is linked to suspension, and then the second point will be suspension is typically an idealist for phenomenological concept, and maybe he's giving a materialist response to suspension. So he's doing a materialist suspension. After that, one of the things on page 159, one of the things that interested me, once again, a page with lots of suspensions on it. Is that all I want to say? Page 158, he talks about spontaneous ontology.
Just to double check.
Yes?
So are you saying, you're saying when he talks about suspension, it's about suspending something from its normal engagements and kind of like assigning it into some kind of use for us? Or is it also specifically suspending the uncertainty of the future, right? Because we feel uncertain about the future because the elemental is chaotic, and so that's the uncertainty that we're suspending. Because both of those suspensions, both senses could be operative here at the same time. But are you saying it's one or the other,
Yes, I think
or
so.
potentially both?
Potentially both. It's just that there are these two paragraphs where he discusses labor as suspension. So it's suspension of independence, and it's also suspension of the uncertain future, which one could see that they're linked if they're fully independent and we have absolutely no control.
Absolutely.
That will be part of an uncertain future. But I think these two discussions are related. They're at least two faces of the same concept. So that's part of his definition of labor or his development of labor as suspension. I've noted on page 158, he talks about ontology as being spontaneous. That's in the bottom paragraph. The thing evinces this hold or this comprehension. There he's constantly playing with the fact that the hold is, or to hold or to grasp is prendre, and comprehension is comprendre. So it's the same root, but with com before. So constantly getting these double terms. It's both physically taking hold and mentally taking hold or comprehending. Possession neutralizes this being. I jump, but in this suspension, possession comprehends the being of the existent. So we've got a suspension again. Ontology is a relation with things which manifest things. The ontology that grasps the being of the existent is a spontaneous and pre-theoretical work of every inhabitant of the earth. So ontology is a spontaneous and pre-theoretical work. And he's just talked about comprehension when for Heidegger, ontology is tied to our comprehension of being. And at the same time, this seems to me to be potentially variable. So I just put the two together and said everyone has a spontaneous ideology, which is very close to Althusser's notion that everybody has a spontaneous philosophy. Althusser came later with this concept, and probably I think everyone read Levinas after 1961 if they weren't reading him before. So I think he's one of these people. People don't. This is a complaint that Deleuze made. People don't talk about or didn't talk about reading Bergson very much. I think Levinas in his interviews said Bergson was a big influence. Jankelevich, another Jewish philosopher, wrote a book on Bergson. And I think a similar thing with Levinas. I think everybody read Levinas. It's true that the Heidegger mafia was powerful, and Levinas was criticizing Heidegger. That's a throwaway speculation, but I think it's reasonable to assume that Althusser read Levinas, so that may be one of the many sources for this idea of spontaneous philosophy. We've got a spontaneous ontology that comprehends, that has a comprehension of things. So
What page are we on?
Page 158.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm right there.
Bottom paragraph. Page 159. I think this is something, I don't know, maybe you noticed it, maybe it's silly to underline it. This seems a typical French move. So just before, at the bottom of page 158, he says, possession masters, suspends, postpones the unforeseeable future of the element, its independence, its being. So there he's grouping the two together. Unforeseeable future and independence are suspended by possession, but also by labor. Unforeseeable future, not because it exceeds the reach of vision, but because faceless and losing itself in nothingness, it is inscribed in the fathomless depth of the element, coming from an opaque density without origin. So without origin, we think, without beginning. The bad infinite, so Hegel's idea of the bad infinite is the sort of, we would say today, the algorithmic infinite. We've got a formula just for going on and on and on. That's the bad infinite or the indefinite. It has no origin because it has no substance, does not cling to a something, quality that qualifies nothing, without 0 point through which any axis of coordinates would pass. It seems like a leap, but in coordinate geometry, you have the x-axis and the y-axis, and the point for the 0 is called the origin. So he's going from an abstract notion of the origin, there's no origin, it's who says the apeiron, it's an Anaximander, one of the pre-Socratics. And then he's saying it has no 0 point, as in no origin, in the sense of geometry. So algebraical geometry. So that just amused me as a move. He must
Yeah.
have felt very clever with himself.
Independence, independence being an unforeseeable future are indeed all lumped together here. So that's a really important line. And it goes right along with what happens on the following page too, where he's still talking about the suspension. And then that's where it gets more into the beginningless and endlessness of the elemental that bathes us, right?
So that's the bad infinite. We have to suspend that. So we're open
Right.
to the true infinite, which is the transcendence, the idea of infinity, the idea of the infinite. Of course, that's just an algorithmic infinity. It looks elemental. It looks really, mysterious and mystical, but it's just the endless repetition of the same operation. Whereas the other and its transcendence is the idea of the infinite, and it's something radically different. So he's getting us ready to condemn the pagans and the pre-Socratics as not open to this dimension of the true infinite. Going with that, he talks about formula, because I thought bad infinite, 0 point, okay, it's algorithmic, and there's a sentence just after where he says there's no formula.
Yeah, it's right around here somewhere. Where is that? Just saw it. Huh. I swear I just saw it. Oh, formula. Okay. Second full paragraph, a sentence on the first paragraph, 159, to suspend this independence of being, this materiality of the elemental non-I by possession does not amount to thinking the suspension or obtaining it by the effect of a formula.
Yes. So that confirms the idea that it's not formulaic, it's not algorithmic, it's something different.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and Mandy asked something in the chat about
Yes, sorry.
the femininity principle. Oh, let's bring it back up. She said, does this relate to Heidegger's attunements or modes, or is this very different? And I think that was about the dwelling, the sort of energy of the dwelling. I think that's what you're talking about. Is that right, Mandy? Assuming that that's it, I would say that it seems related, right? It seems like there's a kind of, when we're talking about state of mind as meaning the always already being attuned to some kind of mood, right? As a sort of structure that's equiprimordial to our modal gut sort of sense of understanding for the possibilities of things in ourselves, as well as discourse and the symbolic, right? When we're saying all of those things are equiprimordial, that those would be the sort of existential structures. He doesn't want to use the term transcendentals, but those would be the sort of existential structures of the ability to even tell the difference between being at home and being in a home. For Heidegger, those would be the different. We wouldn't be able to say that there's a difference there if it wasn't for the fact that we are those beings that have this thing that got translated by McKerracher and Robinson as state of mind. So yes, I think that you're right. There is that relation there. They're not the same thing though, but they're definitely But state of mind in that sense means that we can be attuned to the different kind of energies of spaces, even, right? Like different spaces can be better suited to certain kinds of energies. Like a basketball court is better suited to a certain kind of energy as well. But I I do feel like at this point I'm going out on a limb, because I'm not saying that Levinas necessarily wants to say that, but I think that you could do that with that here. What do you think, Terrence?
Well, it's not the same concepts, but yes, in some sense, you have to be attuned to the interiority, intimacy, the gentleness of the place where you live, to so that it is to experience it as a home. Otherwise, you're just there. You say, "What am I doing here? There are too many things to trip over." You're not attuned to its dwelling nature or domesticity in that sense. Everything's just sort of, hard, sharp things that you can knock up against. Like Neil designed hotel room. So yes, it's for me, we'll say an attunement-like structure.
There we go.
I've already
I
said
have
something. Yes.
a little sidebar question of translation, and I'm not sure if it's going to be significant or not. But reading through, I noticed a kind of like I don't know, it's almost like a filler phrase that Levinas uses quite a lot, and it gets translated as "to be sure." So like he'll be saying something like, "To be sure, this thing is this thing." Um, and I'm not, I wanted to check if that has a particular connotation in French, because in English, if I hear someone say "to be sure," to me, that's kind of them implying that, yes, this thing that I'm saying, or yes, this is how things happen, but like kind of then going to say how there's a nuance or subtlety to
Right.
it. So I wasn't sure. I just kept reading that over and over, Levinas saying "to be sure" sentence. Um, and I wanted to see if that maybe has a different implication in French of when, if, or if that's just like a personal tick that he has with his own way of speech. Um, well, speech in text.
He's got a lot of these things, but they're sort of concessive, contrastive things. Yes, you can say that it's justifiable, but, and I'm going to introduce something else. Hello. Morality. I'm trying to find. I've got an EPUB version, and it says it gives me in the search function 8 matches, but it doesn't find everything. So I'm looking in the preface, supposedly, a ray deer. I think that's it. That must be to tell the truth. That's that. They may not all be translated in the same way. So I'll try and look. I've got an EPUB in English with a paperback in French. So I'm on the track. I'm almost there. The visage of being that shows itself in war is fixed. The moral consciousness, historically, ah, philosophers distrusted is on benefici cert, CERTES. It's close relation in English would be certainly they profit from it. Lingus chose to be sure because it's more colloquial, but it's
But is that the certainty of this is absolutely certain, as in this is very important that we point out that this is certain, or is
Yeah.
it the throwaway admission? Of course, people think this, but
yes, I'm accepting that. That's okay. We can say that.
okay.
To be sure, they profit from it to announce peace also. Okay, he's saying that peace and war are as usually conceived are sort of co-equal conditions of each other, and he talks about eschatology and messianic peace, which must superpose itself upon the ontology of war. Philosophers distrust it, eschatology. To be sure, they profit from it to announce peace also. They deduce a final peace from the reason that plays. So he's making a strong assertion, and philosophers distrust eschatology of messianic peace. So he's making a strong assertion about philosophers, and then he says, well, yes, I have to admit they do give some place to this notion because they announce an end to war, but there's always but I look a little further on. But for them, eschatology, a subjective and arbitrary divination of the future, the result of a revelation without evidences, tributary of faith belongs naturally to opinion. So it's this, I concede you this, but it doesn't change my strong assertions that I'm making. So at least in that case, well, we could go through all of them, but I
Yeah,
think
I guess
that's the basic thing.
I just wanted to check um if it did have this like aspect of yes, I'll concede this point, yet, and then it's always the yet or the but of,
Yes.
but this is my point. This is my stance against that or developing that or something else. So that way every
Probably,
time
yes.
I see
I could
that.
see that, but that's just empirical. It's not even seeing the logic of the situation. So my point holds.
Mhm.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Good catch.
Well, good. Yes, good to verify if there's always to be sure and then yet or but very close afterwards. If you find an orphan one, it's just to be sure without a yet or a but. That will be interesting. And then this is almost everything. Just I noticed on page 161, this this thing that you go along, it's complicated, but it sounds really good. Yes, there's the bad infinite, there's the transcendent other. These things are never going. It's like, can you deduce ought from is? That's how Lyotard reads Levinas. He says there's a language game of is, of factuality, of science and history and things like that. And then there's the ought, and what is the logical or grammatical structure of the ought? So lots of the way Levinas is talking can be seen in terms of that model, even if it's sort of reduces some of the richness. Yes, factually, empirically, we have these things, but they could either just sort of keep us stuck in the ears, or they could have an analogous structure to the transcendent other or the infinite, and put us on the right track. But we will never be able to deduce the infinite from the finite, even in separation. So we can go along with that. That sounds great. And on page 160, at the end of the first paragraph, he says, Labour grapples with the fallacious resistance of nameless matter, the infinity of its nothingness. So we're getting all sorts of stuff about, earth and sky, and the elements can be enjoyed. And finally, they're just faceless, abyssal currents flowing into nothingness. So Labour, it acts in the phenomenon. It attacks only the facelessness of the pagan gods, whose nothingness is henceforth exposed. Okay, Levinas, that's you talking. You've got your metaphysical idea of the face, and you're saying these gods, pagan gods, are faceless. I don't think the Greeks, the Homeric Greeks, would say that their gods were faceless. So, but in his precise technical sense, one could say they didn't have the idea of the infinite the way Levinas is developing it, so they're faceless. But certainly the pagan gods are faceless, and their nothingness is henceforth exposed. This is a strong demarcation, which we might want to accept, or we might want to modify. You quoted Latour at the beginning, Dave. So we may say we have the equivalent of the faceless gods today, or the pagan gods today. They may be not as faceless as that. They could be whatever. Jon Snow could be a pagan god because he did a sort of a myth-making technological apparatus. And maybe this demarcation, maybe he's being neutral there. He's just saying, well, there's something really different compared to this idea of the infinite and of the face of the other. I'm going to say that I've developed all this richness of the pagan gods, but ultimately, in relation to that, they're faceless, and they're masks of, or not even masks or faceless, they're expressions of nothingness. Maybe he's being nice, but it doesn't sound like it when he makes sentences like that. Prometheus stealing the fire of the heavens symbolizes industrious labor in its impiety. So he's saying, well, I get it as saying, it puzzled me at first. He's saying that the pagan gods are dead to us. Their nothingness has been exposed. And so even Prometheus is just a symbol of labor. Labor is something for us. It's something, it's a big concept for Levinas. And he seems to be saying that Prometheus now is just a symbol of the industrious labor in its impiety, and I'm taking impiety to be related to the atheism with respect to the pagan gods. So that's a different point. Either the gods were always faceless and built on nothingness, or today these gods are dead, and we've got the demythologized purified idea of the infinite, and the rest are just dead husks, or sort of not even real symbols, just sort of allegorical symbols, or where we can translate them easily. Prometheus is just the symbol of industrious labor when he steals the fire. Obviously, I don't believe in the Greek gods, but I don't believe in the theological God either. So I don't know how these recurrent sort of returns to old religion losers, Judeo-Christian religion wins. It's more philosophical. It just has to be pushed a step further to become even more philosophical, or we have to find the philosophy with the idea of infinity underneath sort of its deficient presentations. At the end of the day, I'm not 100% on this team.
Right. Right. It's the point, I think, in interpreting Levinas where we do have to ask how much his religious sense really does form a sort of directionality for the entirety of his project, and that way certain ways that he staples down concepts or stipulates them, it's going to, well, why does he have to do it that way? Well, because there is an end to his thinking, or a certain ground to his thinking that is not up for discussion or serious debate throughout the development of the text, and like there's this part of me that just wants to say, yeah, okay, well, he's a special kind of religious Jewish man, and I don't know enough about the colors of Jewish intellectual approaches, but if his is, whether his is standard or more rare, for him to say that God is the infinity of the interpretation of a text, for instance, like, which is just to say, like, rabbis throughout the thousands of years, like, being able to constantly come up with like even more and more sophisticated readings of scripture, that's God. Like, well, then that's not what anybody I've ever met thinks is God. And but if and maybe he's just saying that that's a way of thinking about God, and I actually think God's a lot of other things too. Well, but which, I guess there's this part of me that wants to say I could basically be a Levinasian kind of theist if all that is meant is infinition itself. And infinition is something we only discover, which is to say the sort of hundreds to thousands of years of the development of sophistication in terms of being able to enter into different standpoints and take on certain different perspectives and interpretations on things. If that's what he's getting at, then I would be that kind of theist, I suppose. I just wouldn't feel the need to call it a theism.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
So
Because
it's
at that point, I just
nomination.
Yeah.
It's like but there could be something behind it. That is to say, Lacan makes a big difference between God is unconscious, which he endorses, and the unconscious is God, which he considers to be theosophical nonsense. And you can see some people, they slip between one and the other. So there's a more conceptual understanding, and then there's a sort of more atavistic, back to the religion of my childhood or of my social group. And so it's a similar thing with Levinas. we proved that you have to call this gentleness something, and the feminine seems a pretty good word for it, for conceptual reasons and for empirical reasons. So the God thing, it could be, I've got this idea of the infinite. I've developed all sorts of synonyms and a constellation of quasi synonyms, and I put God in there to help understand things. And the other reading is, oops, I slip sometimes and I become dogmatic and I put in my childhood and in fact my life's work, because he was he claims that it's reading the Talmud that oriented his whole philosophical work. And
Yeah, but is that
it's
in which way?
intrusive,
It's which way
100%.
is the question.
Which way is it? Is it just sometimes he's tired, conceptually speaking, and the God terminology intrudes, and the get away from us, you faceless pagan gods, you're just nothingness, I banish you, comes to the fore, or is, I mean, I prefer that to saying to being paranoid and saying there's a hidden agenda, and he's tried to prove the superiority of the Talmudic uh, dogmatically interpreted way of thinking. So I don't. It would be unnecessary to his intellectual success to have a secret agenda. He could have declared it outright, as he does in his Talmudic readings texts. So I think it's just from the philosophical point of view, he sort of has a sort of conceptual ladder, and sometimes he's really sublating as powerfully as possible, and sometimes he desublates a little.
Okay,
I prefer to see it
maybe.
like that.
Uh, I I wanted to. I'm not sure if this feels relevant, but this talk of like the pagan gods aspect got me thinking about when he uses the term atheism. Uh, and at first, when you read it, you're like, "Oh, atheism. That's why are we talking about that?" Um, but it seems like maybe he's using that word in a particular way in his development. And so I wonder if that relates to then what the gods, the pagan gods, mean according to that atheism he was mentioning to
Ah,
before. Um, yeah, just because if he is gonna drop anything religious in this book, it doesn't feel like anything that we understand as colloquial religion.
right.
Um, so I wonder if yeah, if this is basically just like a slip that he had, um, talking about this part, or if he's kind of almost using it in more of a allegorical, metaphorical way of within his system. So, but it's hard to, I don't know, it's hard to parse if it's even meant to be parsed.
Well, Terrence just laid out two ways of thinking about it, and he said he liked the latter. I like the latter as well because it's a way of taking Levinas more seriously for us, I think. Um, and I think that people can be pretty dismissive of him when they do this reductio ad theology or theological presuppositions. Like they're dismissing him on the basis that, oh, he was actually this religious Jewish guy. He just couldn't really own up to that in his philosophy. He tried to act like there was a big dividing line, but he wasn't actually serious about that. Versus, no, he was actually serious about that, and he's pretty sure that he's using these words in such a different way that he's able to do this. So going with that latter interpretation, I think then we could actually say something really cool with what you just said, Cesar, which is basically that The atheist, see, he says basically like that's an innovation, right? The ability to be an atheist is an innovation that comes from separation. And it's an innovation for him. Well, why? Because if it's not for that separation and interiorization that's made possible through the dwelling, well, then we'd be in this state of participation. And then we wouldn't have the possibility of forgetting origins and not even caring about origins and not even thinking about infinity, and just kind of the possibility of staying self-absorbed is it becomes the condition of possibility for totalization. But that's the condition of possibility for the breach of the totality from the face of the other, and the idea of infinity and the idea of perfection. And so atheism becomes a condition for some other kind of so a confrontation with infinity. Well, what would be the opposite? What is this thing in participation? Well, if atheism is the ability to forget what we are or what we're a part of, or what the idea of infinity or exteriority, then it would seem like participation would be. I'm just going to kind of run with what we've already kind of talked about. It's immersion and immediacy. And so in a sense, I think the divine, the idea of infinity, the face of the other, all these things he'll be talking about later, those are not really separated yet. And so it's all just this pantheistic and or polytheistic a blending of the elemental, of me with the other in the tribe. Like we're all just kind of like I don't have a deep interiority. I don't have a literary self. I'm not highly cultivated in this sort of cultural, civilizational sense. So I'm not able to even forget about the magical possibilities of existence, or like the transcendent, because I no, everything's imbued with mythology and superstition. Going back to Levi Brule, everything has it. Oh, that person fell off of the tree. Well, their enemies must have put a hex on them. Oh, that person just sprained their ankle. That must mean that thing they did 5 minutes ago, we will never do that again in this tribe. If anyone ever does that thing again, chances are something bad's going to happen. We just saw it with our own eyes. That person sprained their ankle 5 minutes ago. What did they do? We'll never do that again. And it's just like this weird, you're trying to reason. There is a logic to it. You're using reason and logic, but it's a sort of proto-reason and logic that is not separated yet from the superstitious and the mythological. And so in that sense, to say that these gods are faceless, I think part of it's just to say like we're so in them and they in us, in a sort of sense, that we can't recognize ourselves as separate. We can't forget that they exist, and therefore we'll never be able to have like this sort of moment of breakthrough where you discover the burning bush or whatever, I don't know if that helps or if that just made it more confusing. What do you guys think?
I think that's the right way of looking at it, at least in terms of Levinas. There's another book by Bruno Latour, a short one that you should be able to read in a day or a half a day. It's called Rejoice. And he speaks, because he's distinguished these different modes of existence. And one of them is the religious, which is this sort of hermeneutic infinity of interpretation, and something that flows along that continuity of the tradition of interpretation. For him, it's the Gospels. And so he says, usually I speak from inside the scientific mode of existence, or the philosophical mode of existence. I'm going to speak from inside the religious mode of existence. And he mentions Nietzsche, and he says the death of God is a really great concept for a fully religious person. Nietzsche should have been canonized as Saint Nietzsche. He's done more for Well, he's a Catholic, Latour, or he was a Catholic because he died 2 years ago. Um,
I didn't actually know he died. That's terrible.
well, he's in his 80s, I think. And so he said Nietzsche did more for religion than all the dogmatic theologians. So the word God is not necessary. It's part of the religious tradition, and you would have to comment and redefine and reorient, even to the point of abandoning. So it's more being situated within this hermeneutic infinitude that is religious, but it claims that that mode of existence is the mode of existence of love as well. And the actual dogmas and particular words like God are unnecessary to it.
Okay, so I just downloaded Rejoicing or the Torments of Religious
Rejoicing.
Speech.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. And also an inquiry into modes of existence, which has been on my radar now for a while. I think it came out when I was first. I think Reassembling the Social had just come out, and that's how I found out about Latour, because a professor was reading Reassembling the Social and talking about actor network theory, and I was like, oh, okay. And then when I started looking into it, I was like, oh, this is actually where guys like Delanda and the object-oriented ontologists and stuff are going with their, like, they're all like between Deleuze and Latour, it seems like. And so I was like, oh, okay. But then I didn't really look back at it until more recently, as I've been trying to think a lot more about this question about the separation between the anthropological and the sociological, and the kind of anthropological presuppositions that Heidegger and Levinas and a lot of these thinkers like Marx and Engels, like the kinds of assumptions that they have when it comes to all of this stuff. Mandy said she read Actor Network Theory, R.I.P. Latour. Yeah, 100%. Too bad to hear. But anyway, thanks, Terrence. I'll definitely check out both of those probably really soon, because this is like really important. So.
Spot on your research program in its current phase.
Yeah. Which is just awesome. Awesome that you put me onto this all with the participation thing. You're a good example of teaching is not meiutics, right? Like I did not have the concept of participation inside of me that came from you, like showing it's there. Like that couldn't have come from inside me. That was really great. I'm gonna listen. I got to step away really.
Well, I've got to go now. I think that's a good conclusion. So
that's a perfect
conclusion.
Yeah, it's a perfect conclusion, actually. So cool. Yeah, I got to go do some stuff. That sounds good then. Anything in close there, Mandy, Cesar? Anything before we stop the recording? Cesar, did you get to see the entirety of the thing I did with Nance yesterday?
Yes, I think so. Or, I saw the most of it, so yeah.
Sick. All right, badass. Yeah, we're very excited. Can't wait to get to it.
That's on the TuCon thing, or what was it?
Yes.
I
mean, I think
I still haven't watched that yet.
Okay, cool. So basically, I mean, the main thing is there's all kinds of cool experimental stuff we're doing with the medium here. Zoom with its breakout rooms, the concrete space with its breakout rooms, what's live and what will be live later, and what's simultaneous and what's sequential, and how we're playing with all those things. That's kind of what it all gets into. So yeah, it's going to be cool.
Okay, great. Bye-bye.
All right, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.